The crystalline tomb gleamed in the torchlight like a fallen star buried beneath 1,000 years of stone and silence. King Cassius Nightshade stood before it, his breath forming clouds in the frozen air of the burial chamber, his silver eyes fixed on the figure suspended within the translucent crystal. She looked peaceful, almost alive, her features preserved with such perfection that it seemed she might open her eyes at any moment. Her armor, forged from metals that no longer existed in the modern world, still held its luster, and her dark hair floated around her face as if suspended in water rather than solid crystal. This was the Guardian, the legendary warrior whose name had been whispered in reverence and fear for centuries, the immortal protector who had sacrificed everything to save a world that had long forgotten her. Cassius had not believed the legends until 3 months ago, when the visions began. Every night, he saw the same apocalyptic future, his kingdom burning, his people screaming, reality itself tearing apart at the seams as something ancient and malevolent clawed its way back into existence. His court sorcerers had searched every prophecy, every ancient text, every forbidden grimoire, and they all pointed to the same impossible conclusion. Only the ancient Guardian could prevent what was coming. But the Guardian had been dead for a millennium, her sacrifice complete, her story ended. Yet here he stood, having journeyed through territories no Alpha had, crossed in generations, having climbed mountains that touched the sky itself, having lost 3 of his best warriors to the magical wards protecting this place, all because a fragment of parchment older than his bloodline had whispered a single possibility. The Guardian was not dead but sleeping, and only the blood of a true Alpha King could wake her. His beta commander, Marcus, shifted nervously behind him, the warrior's usual stoic demeanor cracking in the presence of such ancient power. The chamber itself seemed alive, pulsing with magic that predated the lunar courts, predated the pack hierarchies, predated everything Cassius thought he knew about their world. Symbols carved into the walls glowed with a soft blue light, depicting battles against creatures that should not exist, showing the Guardian fighting alongside beings of pure light against shadows that consumed entire civilizations. These were not the sanitized legends told to pups at bedtime. These were historical records of wars that had shaped the very fabric of reality, conflicts so devastating that the modern supernatural world existed only because someone had been willing to pay the ultimate price. Cassius drew the ceremonial blade from his belt, its edge sharp enough to split moonlight, its surface inscribed with runes that his ancestor had commissioned specifically for this moment. The prophecy had been clear about the ritual, disturbingly specific in its requirements. He had to bleed upon the crystal, had to offer his essence freely, had to speak the words of awakening in the old tongue that few still remembered. His tutors had drilled the pronunciation into him during the desperate journey here, making him repeat the ancient phrases until they felt natural on his tongue. But now, standing before the sleeping Guardian, doubt crept through his certainty like frost through stone. What if the texts were wrong? What if this was not salvation but damnation? What if waking something this powerful after 1,000 years of sleep was the very catalyst that would bring about the destruction he feared? He pressed the blade to his palm anyway, because he was a king, and his people were counting on him. Because the vision showed him no alternative. Because sometimes leadership meant taking impossible risks when all other options had been exhausted. The blood welled up dark and rich, carrying the concentrated essence of his alpha bloodline. Generations of power condensed into liquid form. He placed his bleeding hand against the crystal, feeling it warm beneath his touch, feeling something ancient stir in response to his offering. The words came then, flowing from him in the language of the first shifters, syllables that tasted of wild magic and forgotten oaths. The air in the chamber began to vibrate, reality itself bending around the tomb as his blood spread across the crystal surface like veins of light, seeping into hairline fractures he had not noticed before, following patterns that formed a complex geometric design. The crystal began to crack, not violently but deliberately, each fracture spreading with mathematical precision, creating a web of breaking light that illuminated the entire chamber. Marcus stepped back instinctively, his hand going to his weapon, his wolf rising to the surface in response to the overwhelming power flooding the space. Cassius held his ground, though every instinct screamed at him to run, to get as far from this place as possible before whatever was inside broke free. The cracks widened, pieces of crystal falling away like petals, dissolving into mist before they hit the ground. The magic protecting the tomb recognized his blood, accepted his claim, acknowledged his right to wake what had been sleeping for so long. Then her eyes opened, and Cassius understood why legends called her the Guardian, rather than giving her a name mortals could easily speak. Her irises were not one color, but shifting spectrums, ancient power swirling in depths that had witnessed the birth and death of civilizations. She drew breath for the first time in a millennium, her chest expanding as lungs remembered their purpose, as a heart that had been still began to beat again with slow, deliberate rhythm. The last pieces of crystal fell away completely, and she stepped forward onto stone that had not felt her weight since before his ancestors had established their first pact territories. She moved with fluid grace that spoke of countless battles, of training that had transcended mere physical skill to become something approaching art. Her presence filled the chamber, not through size but through sheer concentrated existence, as if reality bent slightly around her to accommodate the weight of her being. Lyra looked at the man before her, this alpha king who had pulled her from the darkness, and felt the disorientation of temporal displacement crash over her like a wave. 1,000 years. She had been gone 1,000 years, suspended in a sleep that felt simultaneously like a single heartbeat and an eternity of dreaming. The magical tethers connecting her to the world had frayed during her absence. Connections to people and places that no longer existed. Purposes that had been fulfilled or forgotten. She could feel the changes in the air itself, could sense how magic had diminished and transformed, could detect the subtle shifts in reality that spoke of time's relentless passage. The man before her carried power in his blood, ancient lineage mixed with something she almost recognized, but the world beyond this chamber was foreign in ways she could not yet comprehend. Her voice, when it came, resonated with harmonics that human vocal cords could not produce, layered with echoes of the magic sustaining her existence. Who calls the Guardian from her rest? What threat requires my intervention? She spoke in the old tongue naturally, the language of her era, only to see confusion flash across the Alpha's face. Of course, 1,000 years would have transformed language as thoroughly as everything else. She reached into the deep well of knowledge that came with her immortal nature, pulling linguistic patterns from the collective unconscious of the world, adapting her speech to match the modern era. She repeated her question in contemporary language, though the archaic formality remained. I am Lyra Shadowmend, guardian of the veil, keeper of the balance, sentinel of the threshold. You have awakened me with Alpha, blood, and ancient words. Speak your need, King of Wolves, for I do not wake without purpose. If you're enjoying this story, please like this video and let me know in the comments what you think will happen next. Don't forget to subscribe for more supernatural romance content. Cassius found his voice, though it took effort to speak normally in the presence of such concentrated power. I am Cassius Nightshade, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, and I have awakened you because the world faces destruction. The veil you died to protect is failing. Something is trying to break through from the other side, and every prophecy, every ancient text, every vision I receive says that only you can stop what is coming. He gestured to Marcus, who produced a leather case containing the documentation they had gathered, centuries of warnings and predictions, all pointing to the same catastrophic conclusion. We have perhaps 3 months before the barriers collapse completely. I need your help too. Prevent the apocalypse. Lyra took the documents, her fingers moving across pages with the careful reverence of someone who remembered when knowledge was precious and rare. She read with inhuman speed, absorbing not just words, but the magical residue clinging to the parchments, the echoes of the seers who had penned these warnings. Her expression darkened with each page, recognition and horror warring in those shifting eyes. The Void Walkers, she whispered, her voice carrying a weight of ancient dread. They survived the sealing. I had hoped, I had believed, that my sacrifice had destroyed them completely, but they merely retreated, waited, plotted their return across the span of centuries. She looked up at Cassius with an intensity that made his wolf whimper and submit despite his alpha nature. Your bloodline is contaminated, King Cassius. The curse that allows the Voidwalkers to return flows through your veins, placed there generations ago by my own hand, to serve as a fail-safe and a warning. You are both the key to their return and the lock that might stop them. The revelation hit Cassius like a physical blow. What are you saying? How can my bloodline be cursed by you? My family has ruled these territories for 800 years with honor and strength. We are descended from the first alphas, from the pack leaders who unified the tribes. Confusion and anger colored his words, his wolf rising in defensive response to the accusation. But even as he protested, pieces began, falling into place. The visions that plagued only him, never his siblings or cousins. The strange power in his blood that made him stronger than any alpha in recorded history. The way magic responded to him differently than to other wolves. The persistent dreams of a life he had never lived. Memories that could not be his own. Lyra's expression softened slightly, though sadness replaced the hardness. Sit, young king, and I will tell you a truth that has been buried beneath centuries of deliberate forgetting. Your ancestor, the one you call the first alpha, was not born to leadership. He was a warrior in my service, one of the champions of the Veil, sworn to protect reality from extra-dimensional threats. When the final battle came, when I had to seal the rift and trap myself in crystal sleep to maintain the barrier, I knew the Voidwalkers would eventually find a way to weaken the seal. They are patient and cunning, and 1,000 years is nothing to beings who exist outside normal time. So I placed a fragment of my own essence into your ancestor's bloodline, a piece of my power that would pass down through generations, hidden and dormant, waiting for the moment when it would be needed. She moved closer to Cassius, her hand rising to hover near his chest, where she could sense the foreign magic sleeping in his blood. That fragment was meant to serve two purposes. First, it would allow one of his descendants to wake me when the time came, as you have done. Second, it would give that descendant the power necessary to fight alongside me when the Voidwalkers returned. But magic always has a price, always demands balance. The fragment also serves as a beacon, a connection that the Voidwalkers can exploit to anchor themselves to this reality. Your existence makes you both our greatest weapon and our most dangerous vulnerability. The stronger you become, the easier it is for them to use you as a doorway. The prophecies are correct. You are the key to their return, but you are also the only one who can help me stop them. Marcus stepped forward, his warrior instincts overriding his awe. Then we remove the fragment. We cut the curse out of him, break the connection, and the Voidwalkers lose their anchor. Surely your power can accomplish such a thing, Guardian. His hand rested on his sword hilt, ready to defend his king against any threat, even one standing right in front of them offering help. The Beta's loyalty was absolute. His willingness to challenge an immortal guardian proof of his devotion to Cassius. Lyra shook her head, her expression grave. If it were that simple, I would have done it differently from the beginning. The fragment is woven into every cell of his body, integrated so completely that removing it would kill him instantly. More than that, it is the only thing allowing the veil to remain partially intact. My sacrifice created the barrier, but I have been sleeping, unable to maintain it actively. The fragment has been sustaining the seal unconsciously, drawing on the life force of each generation to keep the Voidwalkers contained. Remove it, and the barrier collapses immediately, giving them full access to this world within hours, rather than months. The curse and the blessing are inseparable, two sides of the same magical coin. Cassius forced himself to think clearly despite the shock, to analyze this as he would any strategic problem facing his kingdom. So my choice is to either die and doom the world immediately, or live and potentially become the doorway that dooms it later. Those are not acceptable options, Guardian. There has to be another way. He met her ancient gaze with determination, born from years of leadership, refusing to accept that his existence was nothing more than a cosmic trap waiting to spring. Tell me what we need to do. Tell me how we fight beings that exist outside reality itself. Tell me how we win." A flicker of approval crossed Lyra's features. Appreciation for his resilience in the face of impossible circumstances. That is why the fragment chose your bloodline, that strength of will, that refusal to surrender even when defeat seems certain. She turned away, pacing the chamber as she organized thoughts and plans that spanned centuries of contingency preparation. "We have 3 months, you said. That gives us time, though not much. We must travel to the 3 anchor points where the veil is weakest, where the original sealing ritual was performed. At each location, we will perform a reinforcement ceremony that will buy us additional time and make it harder for the Voidwalkers to use you as their gateway. While we do this, I will train you to control the fragment, to use its power deliberately, rather than letting it use you. If you can master it, you can close the door from the inside, so to speak, making yourself useless as an anchor point." She paused, turning back to face him with an expression that carried weight beyond mere strategy. "But I must warn you, King Cassius. The training will be brutal. You will have to confront every darkness within yourself, every fear, every weakness, every secret shame. The fragment responds to emotional resonance, feeding on strong feelings, whether positive or negative. To control it, you must achieve a level of self-awareness and emotional mastery that few mortals ever reach. You will have to become more than an alpha, more than a king. You will have to become something approaching what I am, a being who exists in perfect balance between power and restraint, between strength and compassion, between individual will and collective responsibility." Marcus interjected again, his practical nature cutting through the philosophical weight of the moment. "And what of the kingdom while we chase around to these anchor points? The northern territories span thousands of miles. Our enemies will see this as weakness, as opportunity. Raiders from the eastern pacts have been testing our borders. The Southern Coalition wants our resources. The western wildlands are in chaos with pacts fragmenting and reforming weekly. If Cassius disappears for 3 months, we could return to find we have no kingdom left to save." It was a valid concern, one that Cassius had been wrestling with since deciding to pursue this desperate quest. He had left his sister Seraphina as regent, trusting her political acumen and ruthless efficiency to maintain order in his absence. But Marcus was right that extended absence invited challenge, that alpha authority required visible presence to maintain pack hierarchies. He looked to Lyra, hoping the ancient guardian might have wisdom applicable to modern political realities. "Is there a way to accomplish what we need without abandoning my responsibilities? Can the rituals be performed quickly, allowing me to return between each anchor point?" Lyra considered the question carefully, her immortal perspective wrestling with mortal concerns. The rituals themselves take only a single night, but the anchor points are spread across the continent in places that have become inaccessible over the centuries. The first is in the heart of the burning desert, where reality is so thin that mirages become real and time flows differently. The second is beneath the frozen sea, in underwater caverns that exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The third is at the peak of the Skypiercer mountain, where the air is too thin for mortal lungs and the barriers between worlds are gossamer thin. Reaching each location, performing the ritual, and returning will take weeks even with the fastest travel methods available. But perhaps we can make your absence work in your favor. She moved to the chamber's wall, her fingers tracing the ancient carvings depicting her battles. "Tell your kingdom that you seek the lost artifacts of power, the legendary weapons used in the old wars. Such a quest would be seen as strengthening your position, gathering tools to protect your people. It would explain your absence and make you appear proactive rather than defensive. Meanwhile, we accomplish the real work of reinforcing the veil. When we return, you will indeed be more powerful, making the lie into truth retroactively. Your enemies will think twice about challenging an alpha who has claimed the Guardian's blessing and the weapons of the ancient champions." Cassius nodded slowly, seeing the political brilliance of the approach. "It would also give my sister a narrative to work with, a story to tell the court and the pack that inspires rather than worries them." She could spread tales of my quest, build anticipation, turn my absence into theater that reinforces my legend rather than diminishing it. He felt his strategic mind engaging fully now, moving past shock into planning mode. We will need to leave immediately, before word of your awakening spreads. The fewer who know the truth about the Void Walkers and the curse, the better. Information is a weapon, and I prefer my enemies remain ignorant of our actual situation. Lyra agreed with a gesture of approval, wise for one so young. The Void Walkers have agents in this world, corrupted beings who serve them in exchange for power, or out of desperation or madness. They will be watching for signs of my awakening, trying to prevent us from strengthening the veil. The journey will be dangerous beyond the natural hazards of the locations themselves. We will be hunted by things that should not exist, attacked by forces that bend reality to their will. You will need more than alpha strength to survive. You will need to begin your training immediately, learning to access the fragment's power in controlled bursts. She stepped forward, placing her hand directly over his heart, and Cassius gasped as power surged through him. He could feel the fragment she had mentioned, a knot of foreign magic wrapped around his core, pulsing with potential energy that had been accumulating across generations. It felt simultaneously familiar and alien, part of him yet separate, like discovering an extra organ he had been using unconsciously his entire life. Lyra's magic interfaced with it, creating pathways of understanding, showing him how to direct the power rather than merely channeling it instinctively. The sensation was overwhelming, as if he had been seeing the world through a veil his whole life and someone had just pulled it away, revealing layers of reality he had never imagined existed. When she withdrew her hand, he staggered, and Marcus caught him, supporting his king while shooting suspicious glares at the Guardian. Cassius waved off the concern, straightening despite the disorientation flooding his senses. "I can feel it now," he said, his voice filled with wonder and fear. "It is like having a second heartbeat, a parallel existence running beneath my conscious awareness. How did I never notice this before? How did my healers and sorcerers never detect something so fundamentally integrated into my being? Because I designed it to be invisible," Lyra replied simply. The fragment was meant to remain dormant until the critical moment, hidden from those who might try to exploit or remove it prematurely. Now that it has been activated by my awakening, you can perceive it clearly. But before this moment, it was simply part of who you were, indistinguishable from your natural alpha abilities. She gestured toward the chamber's exit, where stone steps climbed back toward the surface world. "We should depart. Every moment we delay gives the Void Walkers more time to prepare their countermoves. The journey to the burning desert will take 2 weeks by conventional travel, longer if we encounter resistance." As they climbed from the ancient burial chamber, Cassius felt the weight of what lay ahead settling onto his shoulders like a physical burden. He was no longer simply a king managing political alliances and territorial disputes. He was a weapon in a war that transcended mortal concerns, a keystone in barriers holding back existential threats to reality itself. The responsibility was staggering, but he had been trained from birth to carry impossible burdens, to make decisions that affected thousands of lives, to stand firm when others would crumble. He glanced at Lyra, this ancient being who had sacrificed everything once before and had been pulled back into service by his desperate need, and he wondered what it cost her to wake after 1,000 years only to face the same threat again. Are you enjoying this supernatural romance? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next in Cassius and Lyra's journey. They emerged from the mountain into afternoon light that seemed harsh after the chamber's mystical glow. The camp Cassius had established at the mountain's base still stood, though his remaining warriors looked relieved to see their king returning alive. They stared openly at Lyra, at her archaic armor and otherworldly presence, at the way reality seemed slightly uncertain around her, as if unsure whether to categorize her as solid matter or living magic. Marcus immediately began organizing their departure, his efficient commands getting the camp broken down and supplies redistributed for the journey ahead. Cassius took a moment to send messages back to his capital via the communication crystals his court sorcerers had provided. carefully worded announcements about a successful quest and imminent travel for additional objectives. Lyra stood apart from the activity, her senses extending outward as she reacquainted herself with the world after her long absence. So much had changed. The magical signature of the land itself was different, diminished in some ways, yet evolved in others. The supernatural beings she could detect were fewer in number, but more diverse in nature than she remembered. Technology had advanced in ways that would have seemed like magic in her era. Metal constructs that moved without animal power, communication devices that transmitted voices across vast distances instantly. The human population had exploded. Billions of souls compared to the scattered millions of her time, their presence pressing against the supernatural world, forcing it into hiding and adaptation. She could also feel them, the Void Walkers, their consciousness pressing against the weakening barriers like predators testing a fence for weak points. They knew she was awake. They could sense the shift in magical equilibrium her awakening had caused, and they would be adapting their plans accordingly. The timeline had just become much more urgent. They would strike sooner now, try to break through before she could reinforce the anchor points, before Cassius could master the fragment and close himself off as a potential gateway. The cosmic chess game had resumed after a 1,000-year pause, and the opening moves were already being made on both sides. Cassius approached her as his people finished preparations, his expression serious but determined. "I have been thinking about what you said regarding emotional mastery and self-awareness. I am not good at that, Guardian. I am a warrior and a king. I make decisions quickly and act decisively. Introspection has always seemed like a luxury for those without responsibilities. How am I supposed to achieve this transformation you describe in just 3 months, while also managing the physical challenges of reaching the anchor points and performing the rituals?" Lyra turned to face him fully, and for the first time, he saw something approaching warmth in her ancient gaze. "You begin by being honest about your limitations, which you have just done. That is the first step." She gestured for him to walk with her away from the others, seeking privacy for what needed to be discussed. "The journey itself will be the training, Cassius. Every challenge we face will test different aspects of your character and force you to confront parts of yourself you have been avoiding. The burning desert strips away pretense and illusion, forcing travelers to see themselves as they truly are. The journey there will teach you honesty with yourself. The frozen sea drowns those who cannot let go of past trauma and regret. That leg of our quest will teach you forgiveness and release. The Skypiercer Mountain kills those who carry too much ego or too little faith. The final climb will teach you humility and trust." She paused, letting the weight of those lessons settle. "But before we can even begin those journeys, we must address something more immediate. The fragment responds to connection, to bonds between beings. It was designed that way because I believe that isolation makes people vulnerable to corruption, while genuine relationship provides strength and purpose. Right now, the fragment is connected to me through the awakening ritual, drawing on our temporary bond, but that connection is shallow and will fade within days. You need to forge a deeper connection, something that will anchor the power and give you emotional stability as we proceed." Cassius frowned, uncertain where this was leading. "What kind of connection? I have my pack, my family, my closest advisors and warriors. Are those bonds not sufficient?" He thought of his sister Seraphina with her sharp mind and sharper tongue, of Marcus who had stood beside him through countless battles, of the various pack members who looked to him for leadership and protection. Surely those relationships provided the emotional anchoring she described. "Not for this purpose," Lyra said gently. "Those are bonds of duty and hierarchy, of familial obligation and warrior loyalty. They are important, but they are not what the fragment needs. It requires something more primal, more intimate." She met his eyes steadily, and he saw the discomfort there, the reluctance to explain what she knew must be explained. The fragment was designed to respond to mate bonds, to the deep soul connection that occurs between true partners. Your ancestor understood this, which is why he delayed having children for years after receiving the fragment, wanting to ensure that when he did pass it down, it would be to offspring born of genuine love rather than political arrangement. The magic is strongest when rooted in authentic emotional intimacy. The implications hit Cassius like cold water. You are saying I need to find my mate in the next 3 months while also saving the world? That is absurd. Mate bonds are rare, unpredictable. Some alphas search their entire lives without finding their true match. I cannot simply conjure a soul bond out of convenience because the magical fragment in my chest requires it. Frustration colored his words, the impossibility of the requirement seeming like yet another cosmic joke at his expense. He had always known he would need to mate eventually, to produce heirs and secure his bloodline, but he had imagined it, happening on his timeline, through careful selection and political consideration, not as a magical necessity with a countdown attached. Lyra's expression shifted, becoming something he could not quite read. The bond does not need to be with someone new, Cassius. It needs to be genuine, but it does not require you to search. She hesitated, and he realized with shock that the ancient guardian was actually uncertain, actually wrestling with how to communicate something difficult. The fragment recognized something when you woke me, when your blood touched the crystal, when you spoke the words of awakening. A resonance occurred. The magic identified a compatibility, a potential for the kind of connection it was designed to enhance. Understanding dawned slowly, impossibly. You? You are suggesting that I am compatible with you? That we could form a mate bond? The idea seemed absurd on multiple levels. She was an immortal guardian, a being who had existed for millennia before his birth. Someone so far beyond his experience and understanding that the very concept of romantic or mate connection felt inappropriate. Yet even as his mind rejected the notion, something deeper responded, the fragment in his chest pulsing with recognition, with want, with a certainty that bypassed rational thought entirely. I am not suggesting anything, Lyra clarified, her voice carefully neutral. I am simply explaining what the magic has already identified. Whether we act on that compatibility is a choice we must both make freely. I have been alone for longer than your civilization has existed, Cassius. I gave up the possibility of connection when I accepted the Guardian's mantle, when I agreed to exist outside normal time and relationship to serve a greater purpose. Waking to discover that the very magic I designed has identified a potential mate is, she paused, searching for words, complicated. I do not know if I am capable of that kind of bond anymore. If centuries of isolation have made me too distant, too changed, to connect with another being in the way the fragment requires. They stood in heavy silence, both grappling with revelations that shifted the foundation of what they thought this quest would entail. Cassius could feel his wolf responding to her presence in ways he had attributed to her raw power, but now he recognized the deeper current beneath the surface. The pull was not just magical recognition, but something more fundamental. An attraction that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. Physical, certainly, because despite her ancient nature, she appeared as a woman in her prime, beautiful in ways that transcended conventional aesthetics, but also intellectual. The challenge of matching wits with someone who had forgotten more than he would ever learn. And deeper still, something soul deep that recognized kinship, that saw in her isolation a mirror of his own loneliness, despite being surrounded by thousands. If we do not pursue this bond, Cassius said slowly, thinking through the strategic implications. What happens to the fragment? Can I still control it through sheer discipline and willpower? Can we succeed without the emotional anchoring you describe as necessary? He needed to understand all options before making a decision this significant, to separate what was required from what was merely optimal. Lyra considered carefully before responding. You could potentially control it through discipline alone, but the difficulty would be exponentially greater and the chances of success significantly lower. The fragment was designed to work with mate bonds, not against their absence. Fighting its fundamental nature while also fighting the Void Walkers would be like trying to sail against wind and current simultaneously. Possible, perhaps, but requiring such constant effort that a single moment of weakness could prove catastrophic. She turned away, looking toward the horizon where their journey would take them. There is also the matter of what happens after we succeed. Assuming we do, the fragment will remain in you permanently, a source of power but also a constant temptation. Without a mate bond to ground you, to give you emotional anchor and purpose beyond yourself, that power could corrupt you over time. I have seen it happen to others who carried great magic without adequate connection to balance it. So in addition to being a tactical advantage, the mate bond would be a long-term safeguard against corruption. Cassius summarized, his analytical mind organizing the information into decision matrices. But it would also mean binding myself to you permanently, creating a connection that could not be easily severed if it became problematic or unwanted. He looked at her directly, alpha authority lending weight to his words. I need you to be honest with me, Guardian. Could you even tolerate such a bond? You have been independent for millennia, answerable to no one, constrained by nothing except your own. Oath. Taking a mate, especially an alpha mate, means compromise, means considering another's needs and desires, means allowing someone into your innermost self. Are you capable of that after so long alone? The question cut to the heart of Lyra's uncertainty, forcing her to confront truth she had been avoiding. I do not know, she admitted, and the honesty in that admission carried more weight than false confidence would have. I remember what connection felt like, what it meant to care deeply for others, to fight not just for abstract principles, but for specific people I loved. But those memories are distant, faded, like trying to remember the details of a dream upon waking. I have been the guardian for so long that I am not sure where the role ends and the person begins. Taking a mate would mean rediscovering parts of myself I set aside centuries ago, and I cannot promise I will like what I find, or that you will like who I become when those walls come down. Her vulnerability surprised him, this admission of uncertainty from a being who seemed utterly confident in every other context. It made her more real somehow, more than just an immortal weapon or cosmic force. It made her a person, someone who could be hurt, who could fail, who could fear, despite her power. Cassius found himself responding to that vulnerability with protective instinct that had nothing to do with strategic advantage and everything to do with the fragment's recognition humming in his chest. We are both taking impossible risks here, he said quietly. You risk rediscovering humanity after transcending it. I risk binding myself to someone I barely know in service of saving a world that might not appreciate the sacrifice. Perhaps that is appropriate. Perhaps fighting impossible odds requires impossible trust. He extended his hand, not as king to subject or commander to soldier, but as equal to equal, as potential mate to potential mate. I propose we approach this pragmatically. We have 3 months, together regardless, traveling to dangerous places, facing deadly threats, working in close partnership to prevent apocalypse. Let us use that time to see if the bond the fragment identified can actually develop naturally. No forced intimacy, no artificial acceleration, just honest interaction and observation. If at the end of that time we find genuine connection, we formalize the mate bond. If not, we proceed with the harder path of discipline alone. Either way, we give ourselves the best chance of success without sacrificing autonomy or rushing into something neither of us is certain we want. Lyra looked at his extended hand for a long moment, and he could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, the weighing of risks and benefits, the assessment of his character and intentions. Then slowly, deliberately, she clasped his forearm in the warrior's grip, her hand warm and solid against his skin. Your proposal is reasonable, King Cassius. We will walk this path together and see where it leads, making no promises beyond honesty and effort. But I warn you now, getting close to me is dangerous in ways beyond the obvious threats. I carry scars from wars you cannot imagine, trauma that manifests in unexpected ways, darkness that sometimes leaks through my control. You may find that the immortal guardian is less appealing as a mate when you see the broken pieces beneath the legend. He returned her grip firmly, feeling the fragment pulse with approval at their agreement. Then we will be well matched, Guardian. Because I guarantee that 3 months traveling together will show you aspects of me that are far less impressive than the king you see now. I have flaws and weaknesses I hide behind authority and political theater. You will see my temper, my stubbornness, my moments of doubt and fear. If we are going to attempt this bond, better that we see each other clearly from the beginning, rather than discovering incompatibility after commitments are made. Marcus approached then, indicating that preparations were complete and the group was ready to depart. Cassius released Lyra's arm and turned to address his assembled warriors, his voice carrying the commanding authority they expected from their Alpha King. We journey now to the burning desert, seeking the first of the ancient weapons that will aid us in the battles ahead. The Guardian has agreed to accompany us and lend her expertise to our quest. I expect you all to show her the respect and courtesy due to a legendary warrior and honored ally. The journey will be difficult and dangerous, but we are northern wolves, and we do not shy from challenges. We will succeed because failure is not an option when the stakes are this high. The warriors responded with affirmative howls, their voices rising in unison, the sound carrying across the mountain slopes and valleys below. It was a declaration of intent, a promise to their king and to each other that they would see this through regardless of cost. Lyra listened to their war cry with mixed feelings, remembering similar sounds from her own era, warriors pledging themselves to causes greater than individual survival. Some of those warriors had died in her service, sacrificed to seal the very threat now returning. The weight of that history sat heavy on her shoulders. The knowledge that her second chance at defeating the Voidwalkers might cost more lives, might demand more sacrifice. As the group began their descent from the mountain, beginning the long journey toward the burning desert and the first anchor point, Lyra found herself walking beside Cassius, their strides matching unconsciously. The fragment in his chest called to her magic like recognizing like, creating a subtle resonance that grew stronger with proximity. It was not the full mate bond. Not yet, but it was the seed from which such a connection could grow if nurtured properly. She glanced at him sidelong, this Alpha King who had gambled everything on waking. Her, who now faced impossible challenges with determination rather than despair, and she wondered if perhaps, after 1,000 years of isolation, she might remember what it meant to care for someone again. Cassius felt her attention and met her gaze, seeing uncertainty and hope warring in those ancient eyes, and he offered a small smile. One step at a time, Guardian. We will face each challenge as it comes, build this partnership moment by moment, and trust that the path will become clear as we walk it. It was a philosophy that had served him well in governance and warfare, this pragmatic approach to overwhelming complexity. Break impossible problems into manageable pieces, address each piece systematically, trust in adaptation and resilience rather than perfect planning. One step at a time, Lyra echoed, finding comfort in the simplicity of the approach. She had fought cosmic battles and sealed dimensional rifts, had commanded armies and reshaped reality itself, but perhaps what she needed now was exactly this: simple human connection, mundane moments building toward something meaningful. The irony was not lost on her that saving the world might require her to remember how to be a person first, to connect on individual level before attempting to operate on cosmic scale. As they descended into the valley below, neither of them noticed the shadows moving among the rocks above, creatures that should not exist in the mortal realm, servants of the Voidwalkers already tracking. Their movements and reporting back to masters trapped behind failing barriers. The game had begun in earnest, and both sides were making their opening moves. But for this moment, walking side by side toward an uncertain future, Cassius and Lyra allowed themselves to focus on the immediate rather than the apocalyptic, on the connection forming between them rather than the destruction threatening everything they sought to protect. The journey of 1,000 miles and the journey toward potential. Love. Both began with a single step, and they had just taken it together. Epilogue. 6 months after the final anchor point was sealed, and the Voidwalkers were pushed back behind reinforced barriers, Cassius stood in the gardens of his palace, watching Lyra train a new generation of guardians. She had chosen to remain after their success, not just because the mate bond they had forged during their journey had proven genuine and deep, but because she had remembered something during those 3 months of challenges and intimacy. Her purpose was not just to fight cosmic threats, but to prepare others to continue the fight when she could not. The loneliness that had defined her existence for millennia had been replaced by connection, not just to Cassius, but to the pack, to the students she trained, to a world she had decided was worth engaging with rather than simply protecting from a distance. The fragment in Cassius's chest had stabilized completely, its power integrated so thoroughly with his alpha nature that he could channel it without conscious effort, using it to strengthen his kingdom and protect his people. The visions of apocalypse had faded, replaced by ordinary dreams and the occasional prophetic glimpse of future possibilities, rather than inevitable disasters. He had changed during their quest, forced to confront every aspect of himself that the burning desert revealed, to release the guilt and trauma that the frozen sea demanded he surrender, to develop the humility and faith that the sky-piercer mountain required for survival. He was not a different person, but he was a better version of himself, more complete, more balanced. Lyra sensed his attention and turned from her students, crossing the garden to stand beside him, her hand finding his with the easy familiarity of an established bond. "The young ones show promise," she said softly. "Give them a few decades, and they will be formidable. Not guardians, perhaps, but defenders capable of maintaining the veil without requiring my constant intervention." It was progress, a sign that she was learning to delegate, to trust others with responsibilities she had carried alone for so long. Cassius pulled her close, marveling as he always did that this ancient, powerful being had chosen to bind herself to him, had opened her heart after centuries of isolation, and allowed him to see the person beneath the legend. "The council wants to know when we will formalize the mating ceremony publicly," he mentioned, amusement coloring his tone. "Apparently having the guardian as my mate in private is not sufficient for political purposes. They want spectacle, want to strengthen diplomatic ties through the symbolism of our union." Lyra laughed, the sound still rare enough to be precious. "Tell your council that we will formalize it when I finish training this current group, perhaps in the spring. That gives them time to plan their spectacle and gives me time to prepare for being the center of attention, which I have never enjoyed even when I was young and mortal." She leaned into him, sharing warmth and presence. "Besides, we already have the only bond that matters. The rest is theater for political consumption." He kissed her temple, grateful beyond words for her presence, for the impossible connection they had built amid crisis and chaos. "You are right, of course. The mate bond is real regardless of ceremony, but let them have their theater. It makes them happy, and keeping the council happy makes governing easier." Practical as always, he found ways to turn personal matters into political advantage, though the calculation bothered him less now that he had someone with whom to share genuine vulnerability in private. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the northern territories, over a kingdom that had survived and would continue to thrive, because two people had been willing to take impossible risks and trust in unlikely connection. The Voidwalkers would return eventually. Threats of that magnitude were never truly defeated, only delayed. But when they did, they would face not just a single guardian fighting alone, but a unified front of trained defenders, led by a king and his immortal mate who had learned that the strongest magic was not raw power, but the bonds formed between people choosing to stand together against the darkness. If you loved this story, please subscribe to the channel for more supernatural romance content. Leave a comment telling me what you thought of Cassius and Lyra's journey, and hit that like button if you want to see more stories like this. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.